apologized to him and said, I'm really sorry that I didn't say something earlier. I'm sorry that it took me 6 years to say something. I'm in tears, sobbing. He just stopped and said, hey, bro, like, you don't have to apologize at all. You saved my life.
Hey, I'm Ange.
And I'm Beck.
And we are the Gold Diggers, because we believe there's gold found in everyone.
Everyone is unique, interesting, and exciting with a great story to share.
And we aim to find it.
The question is, can we rise to the challenge and strike gold?
Honey, you're my sugar.
So in today's episode, we welcome Dave Adamson into the studio, and he has a very interesting story in that he went really deep. He's got a history of child abuse, and he didn't hold back in sharing his story and his experiences with us and his journey into adulthood through that.
It's rare that you'll hear someone talk so honestly and candidly about something traumatic that's happened to them in their childhood. So this may bring up some trigger points for some of you, so please watch with care.
Honey, you're my sugar.
So today's podcast is a little bit different in that both Beck and I know today's guest. And today we have in the studio Dave Adamson.
Hey, guys, how are you?
Good, how are you?
That wasn't awkward at all.
No, not at all.
Woohoo,
say
Dave.
say podcast again.
Podcast.
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 It's very American.
I
So
think
we
this
have
is
an
going
Aus-
to be an interesting podcast because Ange and Dave, you both have an interesting friendship, don't you?
We do.
You kind of banter a bit.
Yeah, if anybody gives me a rough time about anything, I cannot make one simple error without him jumping on it.
I feel like I just want to be the audience today and just observe the two
Ange-
of you.
It'd be interesting.
Ange is like the older sister I never wanted.
See, and it begins.
Yeah. Yeah. She didn't even notice I said older.
Yes, and it begins.
and
This is
you-
what I'm talking about.
And you are the older brother I ignore.
Wow. Wow, we're both older siblings. That's interesting.
And so we begin.
Yeah. Well, it's good to be here. Thank you
So
for
I
having
have
me.
no idea where this podcast is going to go.
Neither do I.
I know, because beforehand, like we normally give 3 points about our guest.
Okay.
And so we had a little chat beforehand and I said, these are the 3 points I'm going to give. And I got them all completely wrong.
All wrong. All of them were completely wrong. I was like, what, do you even know who I am? Like maybe Beck should be doing this interview.
Well, I think I know who you are.
Yeah.
So let's see if we can get this
All
right.
right, go.
All right. So,
I literally just said this like 2 minutes ago to
so
her.
if I get this wrong,
so
hey,
this,
I'm in menopause, Dave.
I was going to say
anything's
this might be a
possible.
senility test, so keep going.
So you were a sports presenter for Channel 10 for 8 years.
Well done.
And I got one right.
I said sports reporter, but
Reporter.
it was closer than announcer.
Okay.
And I thought you said Channel 7 before. So
She did.
Channel 10's
I did. That's what I got
Channel
wrong.
10 is
Yeah,
right. That was one of the
okay.
things she got wrong.
First correction.
Okay.
yes.
You speak Hebrew?
Ish.
Yeah.
Certainly not fluently, but I study a lot of Hebrew words and Hebrew phrases. Yes.
Yes. And you have quite a big following online under the name Aussie Dave.
Yes. There's another guy in Australia who's going for Aussie Dave. Him and I fight for every platform, and I actually got introduced to some of his employees. He actually runs a hose company, like a garden hose company in Australia. And his employees were quite disappointed that I have the Aussie Dave handle on just about every platform.
Wow. You coined it, but you were in America actually when you got the name Aussie Dave, or was it before you went?
No, it was in America. So I was a TV sports reporter for Channel 10 in Melbourne for 8 years, from 2000 to 2008. And then midway through 2008, I got this weird, vague call into ministry, and I packed up my family, sold all of our possessions, and we moved over to New Jersey, and I became an online pastor.
Yeah.
And at the church I was at, Liquid Church in New Jersey, there was already a Dave on staff and a David on staff. So Dave at Liquid Church was gone. David at Liquid Church was gone. And they said, well, what are we going to do? And the lead pastor said, just go with Aussie Dave at Liquid Church. And everything became Aussie Dave after that. So that dispels the rumor that I came up with that myself when I moved to America.
Dave is
I
a
did
very
not.
popular name.
I was
isn't
gonna
it?
say.
I know so many Daves and Davids. And
See?
I mean, you
Yeah.
weren't original really, were you, Dave?
Well, I didn't choose my name, Ange. I had it bestowed upon me.
Yes.
I
They
had
just
not-
went, he's Dave and he's from Australia, so he can be Aussie Dave.
Aussie Dave.
Yeah.
So, and that's just stuck ever since. I mean, there are people in America who I've worked with in ministry who will literally just call me Oz or Aussie. I don't even know if they know my actual name anymore.
Or is it
Well, I find myself
Aussie?
doing that.
No, I've
Aussie.
taught them how to say Aussie
Oh,
very
yes.
well. Yeah. So, yes, that's where Aussie Dave came
Well,
from.
I even call you Aussie Dave. Yeah.
Yeah, people
So-
in Australia. I've been back in Australia. So I lived in the US for 14 years, been back for 3 years, and people still call me Aussie Dave. Even Australians call me Aussie Dave. It's,
Well, it's just
Kinda
stuck.
weird.
It kind of suits you.
yeah. Well, good. I'm glad because I am Australian and I am Dave.
So let's go back to you were born in Australia. Whereabouts were you born?
Oh, in
We're
a
going
hospital.
right back to the beginning.
Right back. Gosh, we're going
Yeah.
very far back. So I was born in Carlton in Victoria, which is a suburb of Melbourne, kind of inner-ish, not quite really inner-ish, but yeah, suburb of Melbourne in 1971. Are we going that far? Like,
Oh yeah, now you're giving your age away.
I don't mind. I'm 52 and I'm happy to be 52. I like being in my 50s.
Yeah, what was it like? Okay, so I'm
Here we go.
turning 50 soon,
Yeah.
as you know.
What was it like?
What was it like turning 50?
Well, Ange, I was on a boat.
Oh yes.
I was on a boat,
Yes.
just been scuba diving. I went away with you and your family.
Yeah.
Weirdly,
Okay.
it was weird to be on a boat with your family for my 50th and some other people, obviously.
Yeah.
And you all threw a party for me, which was really a massive highlight. But you had me scuba diving with sharks. And,
Yes. When you've never scuba dived before.
Never scuba dived before in my life, and went scuba diving off Osprey Reef, which was like 2 miles down, right, or something.
2,000 meters. Yeah. Off the
Which would
continental
be 2
shelf.
kilometers. I said 2 miles. Fair enough. She corrected me.
So American.
Yeah, right. And so, yeah, I spent 5 days in the lead up to my 50th, more scared than I've ever been in my life, dealing with more fears than I've ever had to deal with in my life, and trying to learn to go against my natural instinct to swim up by swimming down. And so, yeah, turning 50 was interesting and fun, and
Well,
the
they
best.
say you should do something that scares you every day. So did you just make up for your 50 years in that day?
Totally. In
Yeah.
all my 50 years, I don't think I've ever been that
Probably
scared.
50
one of the
scary
most
things in
funniest
a day.
moments of my life
here we go.
happened on that trip.
Was it playing Cards Against Humanity? Because that was
No,
fun.
aside from that.
What was it? What was the funny thing?
Well, before we went on this trip, we had this funny moment where both Dave and Noel ended up in A&E at the same time. It was like 2 days.
That's right.
It was 2 days before we went on this trip. And you'd cut your finger really badly and required a couple of stitches. And Noel thought he'd broken his arm.
Yeah.
And so this bizarre moment where we were all there.
Yeah, we're all gearing up for this big trip away. And then I walk into the emergency because I sliced my finger open while we were moving house. And then I'm sitting down there and then I turn around, like I think I was checking in, right? Or
Yeah.
something, trying to get, seen. And then
Noel
you
comes
guys
in.
walk in. What? So then we ended up planning the rest of the trip, right?
Yeah.
No, what do I need? What's the shopping list I needed? Oh,
Yeah,
while
just sitting
I'm
in
getting
A&E.
stitches and he's getting x-rays.
Yeah. So this leads
Weird.
up. So then you get your finger strapped up and you had this, they put this blue plaster on there.
Yes.
And I'll never forget this moment.
By plaster, she means a Band-Aid.
Band-Aid,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Sorry, I was the
I
British
didn't break
version.
anything.
Yeah, so then there's this moment where you're just learning to dive, and it's about your second dive, your second or third time underwater, and we're
Yes.
now amongst a whole heap of sharks. And there was this shark frenzy going on because the
Yes.
people we were with were feeding the sharks underwater.
And there must have
First of
been,
you.
50 sharks there?
Oh, yeah.
And
They
they were
love
close.
blood too.
They were very, very close. Like I could read the serial number on the tag that was on one of the sharks that came close to me. Like that's how close. And so I'm there trying to get myself all calm and everything. And then I remember something blue started to float in front of my face. And I looked down at my finger and my Band-Aid had come off and my stitch had opened up or had dissolved
And the
or
shark's
something.
going, "That
and all
looks
I'm
like a
thinking is,
tasty finger."
all those Jaws, all those times I watched Jaws, I'm reminded that just a single drop of blood will, like if Finding
And
Nemo
then you're
taught me
wondering
anything.
why you're surrounded by sharks.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just look at him and he's got
gosh.
his finger up in the air and there's the blue plaster on his finger and his eyes are almost cross-eyed in his mask. as the plaster just floats
Yeah,
away.
it was unbelievable. It was fun though, but I love turning 50. Not just because of where I was, but I think the more mature you get, the better you can appreciate the things that you've got in life, and the more experience you have, the easier it is to walk through the desert seasons in life when life gets hard. And so, yeah, I probably wouldn't change it. I remember when I was in my 20s, I was like, 50, gosh, I don't ever want to be 50. That's so old.
Yeah.
But I don't feel old. And, I get told all the time, or I tell people all the time, 50 is the new 30. So
Yeah.
I feel like I got ages to go still.
Well, you have.
Well, people
Let's
are
hope you
living
have.
longer these days, so
Yeah.
probably
That's
is the new
right.
30.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there are things that we learn, as we mature and we see life differently, and our
Yeah.
perspective changes a lot as we age. But I want to talk about a significant thing that happened to you in your childhood and how perhaps that has impacted you and changed over the years.
Yeah.
Because this is something that not many men ever really talk about, and I know you've given us permission to go there today. And we don't hear a men's perspective on this, but there was child abuse in your background. So talk to us a little bit about how that impacted you as a child and how that has looked as you've grown.
Yeah, so I grew up in the western suburbs of Melbourne. My family wasn't particularly wealthy or anything along those lines, and certainly weren't Christian. And so I grew up in, I would say I'm a person of faith now. Like I definitely am a follower of Jesus, but growing up, that was the furthest thing from my reality. And, so we just lived the average sort of Australian life and blue collar sort of life. And then when I was 6 years old, we had one of my uncles from my dad's side of the family came, and he started to stay over at our house, and eventually he moved into our house. We had a bungalow at the back of the house, and because our house was relatively small, my brother and I went out and we stayed out in the bungalow, and my uncle moved into the bungalow as well. And from the age of 6 to 12, he sexually abused my brother and I. He was an alcoholic. And so when he would come home from work smelling of alcohol or clearly drunk, we knew it was going to be a really bad night. So I would say probably a handful of times a week, he was sexually abusing one of us. And that from I'm 6 to the ages of 12, the formative times of my life, living in constant fear every night. And anybody who's been through any sort of sexual abuse understands that you withdraw, especially as a kid, you withdraw a little bit. And so I started to withdraw and didn't even realize it, lived in constant fear. My self-esteem plummeted because I felt totally unworthy to be loved, unworthy to receive anything other than what I was getting. And so that led to me just becoming really timid and shy, and tried to be as small as possible person.
Did you try telling anyone what was going on?
No, I was too scared to. He would threaten us that there would be we would be the ones in trouble. And, as a 6-year-old, I didn't know any better. I certainly, as an adult and, as somebody who's been through a lot of counselling and a lot of trauma counselling specifically, I realized there was a stage in my life where I had to forgive the 6-year-old version of me, because my first thought was, why didn't I tell anybody? But I was 6 and I didn't know what to do, and I was being threatened. And so living through that situation, or growing up in that situation, what it did was, because I became so timid, so shy, so withdrawn, so afraid, I became the target of bullies in primary school. And as a result, I would go to school and get bullied, and then I'd come home and be sexually abused. And so this cycle started to kick in, where I was just spiraling in a world of darkness and not really getting out into the light as much as I needed to.
And were your parents noticing anything?
No, I think my parents at the time, they weren't aware of anything that was going on. My parents, and I would put on the front that I needed to put on in order to survive. I was literally just in survival mode. And so I did and said whatever was needed to survive when I was in front of my parents, but then would go to bed and be panicking all night. But even as I look back at that, my uncle did a lot of bad stuff to me, but I think the worst part for me growing up, the thing that when I look back, the thing that causes the most trauma, I think, is knowing that I was lying in bed. We had bunks. I was in the top bunk, and to hear him sexually abusing my older brother and hearing my brother cry, that was the thing that it causes me as an adult the most trauma.
Yeah.
And so it all ended when I was 11 or 12 years old, and the way that it came to an end was he was sexually abusing my brother one night. He'd come home drunk. He was quite physically intimidating and quite physical with us. And I decided that I'd had enough. And I spent what felt like hours trying to muster up the courage to get up and jump down, because I knew as soon as I hit the floor, he would be aware that I was awake. But realistically, it was probably only minutes to be honest. But I mustered up the courage and I jumped off the bed and ran through the door and went running out and started knocking on the back door of our house. My dad got up and he said, "What's going on?" And I chickened out and I said, "I just need to go to the bathroom." And so I went to the bathroom and sat in the bathroom for 15 minutes, knowing that meant he was probably still abusing my brother. And then I remember walking back out, and he was standing at the door of the bungalow, and he hit me as I walked in, and I climbed back into bed, and a minute after I got back into bed, he started abusing my brother again. And so I jumped down and I just bolted and I ran and I knocked and I said, my dad opened the door and said, "What's happening?" And I said, "My uncle is doing this to my brother." And my dad called him in, and it all ended that night. And my parents didn't really know what to do with any of that at the time. My brother got some counselling, and
when you were going through it, did you and your brother talk about it?
No. Okay. And we don't. To be honest, we don't really even talk about it now.
Yeah.
My brother probably grew up with the same fear and intimidation and shyness that I have, and people cope in different ways, and the way that he's coped is different to the way that I've coped. I coped to a certain extent by because I found faith, because a kid in year 11 in school talked to me about Jesus, and I started following Jesus, and I realized really quickly that following Jesus makes my life better and makes me better at life, but my brother went a different way. And so even now we don't really talk about it, but since I've as an adult had a whole lot of counseling, and I recommend everybody get counseling, everybody who's listening, everybody who's watching. You don't get counseling because you're breathing, you don't get counseling because you're broken, you get counseling because you're breathing. So regardless of what's happened to you, you should get counseling of some description. And I know my brother's been through some counseling as well, but it was, I guess it's just different, not right or wrong, just different counseling to what I had. And so when I started to get counseling, I'd move to America at this point. I would come back and I would have lunch with my brother. And I remember one time I apologized to him as a 30, probably 40s, when I was in my 40s. I apologized to him and said, "I'm really sorry that I didn't say something earlier. I'm sorry that it took me 6 years to say something." And
could he have been feeling the same though?
Well, I remember I'm in tears, sobbing. My brother isn't, I guess, as emotional as I am, and he just stopped and said, "Hey, bro, you don't have to apologize at all. You saved my life." And to hear him say that, I mean, to this day, I still get choked up over it, because I didn't realize that at the time, but that was one of the things that I knew I had to forgive myself. That as a 6-year-old, I wasn't capable of doing anything, and certainly adult version of Dave couldn't have an adult expectations of 6, 8, 10, 12-year-old version of me. And so I was just surviving in those moments. But,
It would have been very intimidating for you too, like being 6 and you've got this big burly uncle.
Yeah.
And that's intimidating.
Yeah, it is. And this guy, my uncle, I found out years later that he had actually sexually abused a lot of people in our extended family and a lot of kids in the neighborhood. And I remember, so my biological father came back and visited me after my youngest daughter was born. And I remember him telling me that he said to me, "Hey, I just want to apologize to you for what my brother did to you. I should have said something because he did that to me as well."
Really?
So this is a guy who'd been doing that for years and years and years, even to his own younger brothers.
Yeah.
And so,
How did that make you feel when your dad apologized?
I said the same thing to him that my brother said to me. You didn't have to apologize. You didn't know what was going on, and you're not responsible. That's the thing.
You mentioned
He's not
about
responsible. My uncle's responsible.
Yeah. You mentioned about counselling. You felt your counselling was different to your brother's. How was it different, and what do you think counselling did for you?
So I've had a bunch of different counsellors. I even just towards the end of last year, early this year, I started seeing a psychologist again because it had been a little while since I'd seen anybody, and I think again you get this sort of help because you're breathing, not because you're broken.
Yeah.
And so I just was like, I think I need a checkup. It's the same reason why I take my car into the shop, right?
Sure.
I go and take my car into the shop so that I don't end up on the highway with steam coming out of or smoke coming out of the engine.
True.
And so that's so I started doing that again. So when I first started getting counselling, it was from a Christian counsellor who was a pastor on staff at the first church I worked at, and he was the sort of counsellor. He was the first person who started to walk me through some of the deep-seated issues that had impacted me from my childhood, like that had carried over into my adult behavior. And because he was a very caring, pastoral sort of man, I remember when I would, bring up something traumatic and burst into tears and not be able to stop crying, I would look up eventually and he'd be there crying as well. And then, he'd put his hand on my shoulder and he would pray for me. So he was very, I feel like he was walking through the trauma with me.
Yeah.
Then I remember that after that, a couple of years later, I started seeing another counselor, and this was another guy, and he decided that he just needed to kick my ass. And so he just totally had a different approach to it. Not a man up and get over it approach, but just that you need to take responsibility for the things you can take responsibility for. And so let's start working through that. And so I was like, oh,
Little bit
wow.
like boot camp.
But I kind of needed mental boot camp to get things back in order so my past wasn't impacting my future anymore.
Yeah.
And then the counselor after that was different again, and so getting all these different styles of counseling have helped. But also because all of the counseling that I had was faith-based, I feel like they understood my general worldview. And so, they might not have all been pastors, but some of them were pastors with counseling degrees. Some of them were just Christian counselors or psychologists who were Christian. And then, the psychologist I've just recently been seeing is not a Christian at all, and he's helped me in a whole different way. So it's the variety of counseling that I've had, plus also most of it being faith-based meant that it aligned with my general worldview.
Yeah.
And so they're able to help me see things in myself that I would not have seen otherwise. So for me, I've got a big tattoo down the whole length of my arm that is in Greek, that is the verse that says, from 2 Corinthians, that says, "Therefore those who are in Christ are a new creation. The old has gone, the new has come." And the reason I got that was because of a counselor who once talked to me about some of the process of, basically you can't grab hold of your future if you're still holding on to your past. And then he said, and plus, the authors of the Bible say that you're a new creation because of your faith. And I was like, yeah, I need to live in that new creation. I need to start living the life that I'm supposed to live. And as I said earlier, following Jesus makes my life better and makes me better at life. Well, I need to live in that better. And so that for me was a huge thing of just little things like that, where they took elements of faith, elements of scripture, and made me see it in a different way that applied it to me personally. And so that allowed me then to continue to walk into the new future, the new creation that God has made me to be.
So you talked about sort of with counselling helped you to address your adult behaviour as a result of some of the childhood experiences. How have you seen that changed as a result? What were some of the things that perhaps you were doing that you're not doing now?
Well, I would say not changed, changing.
Yeah.
I would say not healed, healing. I actually don't think I'll really get over the trauma this side of heaven, to be really honest.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that is 100% okay.
Yeah.
You know, I think we live life with scars, and those scars are a reminder to me constantly that there is a Redeemer that I can be forgiven and I can live in this new creation.
Yeah.
So the scars remind me of that, and I still go through seasons where, my wife Meg will tell you that I go through seasons where I can't sleep because I wake up with night terrors, and the night terrors are specifically, I'll be really honest with you. The reason I'm seeing a psychologist at the moment is because coming back to Australia has triggered a lot of my past. And it's ridiculous things like the smell of a wattle tree that I didn't have for 14 years in the US. Triggers me because I would have to walk past a wattle tree in order to get into the bungalow. And so when I started seeing this psychologist, he said, you have a hyper awareness about you. You're constantly, eyes are always darting around, looking for where the trouble is going to come from. And we need to work through that process.
Yeah.
So, that's just a new thing that I didn't know I needed to get over.
Yeah.
But some of it, to answer your question, some of it is just the controlling behavior. Once I got out of that situation, I tried to control as much as I possibly could.
Yeah.
And I took that to levels that went too far. Like I became quite, not domineering, but I tried to have everything in place. That's why going scuba diving was so hard for me.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't in control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As soon as I jumped into the ocean,
Yeah.
I'm not in control anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they keep saying, control your breathing.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. But there's so many things that could happen right now.
You go
And
to
my
the
hyper awareness, my hyper alertness is on.
Yeah.
And so you don't even realize, Ange, that for me was so intimidating, so hard, but also so, I think about it all the time, so revealing and so helpful because I was thinking about this today. Even just today, I was thinking about it. The biggest trouble I had with scuba diving was I didn't realize I was swimming like on a vertical axis pointing up. I thought I was going down, but I was actually, angled 45 degrees up. And it wasn't until like the last day that I started to go 45 degrees down.
Yeah.
And I remember having this epiphany of, oh my gosh, I'm not in control of everything.
Yeah.
But it's okay, I can still walk into this. And so that for me was part of my healing process. Like there's so many things that have become part of my healing process, which I don't even talk about. I realize it. I talk with my wife about, and she's aware of it.
There is a funny moment just while we were scuba diving. Another funny moment. But I could actually see the difference it made to you is the people that we were with could see that perhaps you were having these struggles. And so they gave you an emotional animal. Do you remember?
Yeah.
So you had your arm just across your body and they gave you this sea cucumber.
Sea cucumber called Trevor.
Called Trevor. And you would stroke the sea cucumber and it grew in size. Rebecca, remember, I don't know why that happened. It seemed to be very content.
Yes, it was. But it helped me to be content because it took my mind off the things that I couldn't control and put my mind on something else. And the guy who did that, he's not a psychologist. No. He was just somebody who reads people really well, and he could see that there was something. And the interesting thing is, later on, I don't know how well you remember this, later on, we're on the boat afterwards, and remember that I said, we should have the crew join us for dinner. And so a crew member, and this was the day, it was our last night on there. And so everybody came and joined us. And the captain of the boat saw the tattoo in Greek on my arm and said, "What's that tattoo say?" And I told him. And he said, "Oh, why'd you get that? What do you mean a new creation?" And I said to him, "I was sexually abused as a kid." And remember how the whole room went quiet?
Yeah.
And he got really emotional.
Yeah.
And just to see, and when I pushed him a little bit, I poked a little bit, he said that you don't strike me as somebody who would have been sexually abused because you seem quote unquote normal. And I said, well, unfortunately, the statistics show that roughly about 1 in 5 men have been sexually abused, but nobody talks about it. So you probably know, and there was probably 5 guys on the boat, right?
Yeah.
5 or 6 guys on the boat, and I was the one. But in other situations, there's probably somebody is probably experiencing this. I'm sure there are people right now who are watching or listening to this podcast who are feeling like I've been there, and
Or are going through
or
it.
I'm going through it, which is even worse. And I would say to those people, you're not alone. There are other people who feel the same way, and it doesn't have to continue, that you can be a new creation. You can move beyond this, and this does not have to define you. That's the thing. There are issues in my past that have impacted who I am today, but they don't define who I am today. And that for me has been my goal. And luckily, I've got a wife who knows absolutely every detail of the whole story and supports and loves me, and she has made up for so many of the shortcoming things that I had in my childhood. She has more than made up for those. I've got 3 adult daughters who all know exactly what's going on, and they are so supportive of me, and they understand Dad. And my eldest daughter's studying psychology now. Social work right now. And part of that is she's doing some psychology stuff. And so she's now going, "Dad, is that because of what happened when you were a kid?"
She's psychoanalyzing you.
Yeah,
isn't
she totally is. But it's okay. It's good. And so, one of the things, this is, not easy to talk about, but I'm so much better at talking about it now.
Yeah.
Because I know that it helps other people, that there are other people who are stuck in this situation now, who have pulled the covers up over their head because they're just trying to survive. And so if me talking about it sets one person on a path of getting some help that they need, that's 100% worth it. As somebody who, is a former megachurch pastor and a person of faith, there's a word that we use in the church and around Christian circles that always, everybody always says it, but I've never really understood what it meant until a few years ago when a counselor talked to me about it. And he said, it's the word redeemed. We all say it, but it's not a word that gets defined very often. And so, people will say, God will redeem your story, or God will redeem that situation, or God will redeem your relationship. Well, to me, what it means to be redeemed is to make the enemy wish he'd never messed with me in the first place. This is what happens. This is what it means to be a new creation. You're being who God actually intended you to be. And that's how I feel I'm living my life at the moment. This is who God made me to be.
Yeah.
And it's got its ups and downs. And we all go through desert seasons. We all go through times when life is really hard. But I think the thing that I've learned through those seasons is to ask, we have to stop asking the question, when can I get out of this season? And I've started to ask, what can I get out of this season? That simple word change changes everything. So I look back on my childhood and I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but I keep asking the question as I look back, what can I continue to get out of this? What can I continue to see that will change me, change my family, change my relationships, change my friendships, and change my future? And so ultimately it's helped propel me into who I've become.
Well, let's talk about your career then for a while, because you started off in commercial television.
Yeah.
But obviously you've now ended up in the church world, a pastor, but online pastor. And it seems that...
No, she said, but online pastor, like it's secondary to a real pastor. You're a pastor, but an online pastor. So
I only
it's
picked that
like
up because
you've got a degree, but an online degree.
Okay.
let's
Wow.
talk
And
about
you're an
that.
online pastor.
Let's talk about that, Ange.
Well, it seems that your life has progressed. So you've got this background in commercial television,
Yeah.
and then it's layer upon layer upon layer, and it's God uses those moments in life, doesn't He, to lead you
For
to
sure.
where you're meant to be.
Yeah.
Did you know at that point that this was a direction you were heading?
No. When I was in high school, my elder sister Jenny, she said to me, "You should just become a journalist because you're a really good writer and you're a really good communicator." This was like after everything with the child abuse had ended and I was starting to become who I was meant to be. And I went, oh, okay. So I started doing a journalism degree, started writing for papers, wrote for magazines, and then ultimately went to TV. And I remember when I went to TV, I was like, oh, this is like the dream job. I go into the office and then I go and interview the biggest sporting names in Australia. And then I go to the Australian Open or the MCG or the Grand Final or whatever. And at the Melbourne Grand Prix, you name it. Like I get to go, and I get paid. This is the best job in the world. And somebody, a pastor once said to me, I think you're meant to be in ministry. Not a chance. Why would I ever go into ministry? That's so lame. I'm gonna keep being a Christian in the workplace, and that's where I'm gonna do my ministry. But then God had a different idea. And it's interesting, 2008, I got this call from a pastor in New Jersey who said, I want you to come and be the online pastor at our church.
Did he say, but the online?
No, he just said, I want you to lead the biggest opportunity the church has ever had since the printing press, to walk into the next generation of communication and lead the way by being a pastor online. Would you be interested? And what I realized in those moments was, all this time I was thinking I was building this career as a journalist and a TV reporter, but all of the skills and all of the experience I had, production, on camera, writing, communicating, all of that, God knew was going to be the perfect thing for me to become an online pastor. And so when I stepped into being an online pastor in the US, I was the 8th online pastor in the world. According to AI, I'm the 6th, but I still go with the 8th. All the other pastors around me who were online weren't able to do the live on camera stuff. Like they could do the pre-record and get multiple goes at it, but I just naturally could do that. And so everything we did was a little bit different, a little bit more spontaneous, a little bit more live, and that just seemed to work. And as it progressed, and I realized that God was using my communication gifts, my production gifts, my on-camera gifts, I was like, okay, God, this whole time I thought I was doing this thing over here for me, but you were playing 3D chess over here, and you were moving the pieces to constantly.
You're also passionate about photography, and that forms part of your social media presence under Aussie Dave.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about your photography journey.
When I turned 40, my wife Meg gave me a camera, and she said, I want you just to use this as a creative outlet. And I'm a creative person, and so I said, okay, great. So I started taking photos and fell in love with it. I fell in love with the idea of telling a story through a simple picture. And then I started to realize as I kept going back to the stories of Jesus, he was telling stories through a picture. The picture was a parable. Somebody would say, what's the kingdom of God like, Jesus? And he would go, well, it's kind of like a man throwing a banquet. And he would paint a picture. And I realized what my photos was I was creating parables that I could take a photo of the sunset and connect it to a scripture. And so that became my Instagram, because I decided in about 2013, 2014, you know what? I'm going to teach my girls everything they need to know about Jesus through my Instagram, because they're native to this platform. And so I just started posting stuff going, I hope my kids look at this one day. And so, they started to do that. So it started to take on a life of its own. And so whenever I take photos.
And then you connected it with Hebrew words as well now?
Yeah, because I was a full-time pastor, and I was in New Jersey, and I decided to meet with this Orthodox Jewish rabbi, and he taught me more about Jesus than probably anybody at that point. An Orthodox rabbi taught me more about Jesus than just about anybody as a full-time pastor. Well, I was just an online pastor, so it's not surprising that somebody else taught me stuff.
Yeah, well,
but he started connecting things that I'd missed, and I was like, how am I missing all of this? And I realized it's because I don't understand the Hebrew culture. And so I started to investigate first century Hebrew culture, and that led to me studying Hebrew words, and that led to me leveraging that first century Jewish culture with a 21st century tool to reach as many people as I can and help people take the next step, because I'm really passionate about Bible illiteracy. I think too many Christians quote the Bible but don't know the Bible. Too many Christians post about the Bible but don't read the Bible for themselves. And so we have to do something to combat that. You have to put it into context.
And I think that actually leads beautifully into what your goal is, Dave, because you are always challenging and confronting people to think about the truth and what really is the truth and how that impacts us, so that we can go deeper and discover our faith in a different way. And I love that about you. I also hate it about you because you're always challenging me and always jumping on me about stuff. But it does make me think.
Yeah.
And it does want to make me dig deeper and pursue what I really feel and see about faith and about Jesus. And so that is obviously what you're very, very passionate about. And, you know, I know that outworks in everything that you do, in your online presence as well and as a pastor, but in your relationships too.
Yeah.
But also for you personally, because you don't let yourself get away with stuff. You challenge yourself as well. And that's the journey that you've been on, is to dig deeper, to find the truth in why do I think this? Why am I believing this? Why am I behaving this way? So it goes across the whole board of who you are as a person. And, you know, that's God's gift to you.
Thanks, Ange.
So how can people connect with you? I know it's Aussie Dave on Instagram. You've written a whole heap of books.
Yeah.
You know, just everything. You've got
Have
podcasts.
Have you read any of them?
I know one's called Meta Church. Have I read it? No.
Oh gosh!
Have
I'm
you
gonna
read my book,
Amazon you
Dave?
both. Yes, I have, Ange. Yes,
You
I have.
hosted my book launch.
I did host your book launch. At that point, I'd only skimmed it, but yes, I have read it. Great book, by the way. If you haven't read it, get it.
So it's Meta Church, and I haven't read it.
52 Hebrew Words is my best-selling book. That's
You've got
what I
another one
like.
coming out soon?
Yes, 52 Hebrew Names of God.
Yeah.
Just devotional things that teach you some simple words. Look, the best way to get in contact with me is Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, Aussie Dave, at Aussie Dave.
Go and ask him a challenging question.
Hey,
He'll respond.
Yeah, I do. I love getting DMs from people. I get tons of them, and it takes me a minute to get back, but I always try to respond because, you know, I just want to help people take the next step in their faith journey, because I've had some great people around me, present company included, who probably don't even realize how much you've pushed me to take a step in my faith journey, and I just want to continue to do the same thing for other people, is help them take the next step in their faith journey.
And hey, we really appreciate you being so open and vulnerable with your story today. I just know that's going to touch and bless a lot of people, because it's something we don't hear about very often from a men's perspective. So if that is you, please seek help, get counselling, and, you know, take Dave's advice here that you can get through that season. So.
Thanks for joining us, Dave.
So that's it for today's podcast. You'll find us on all the major podcast platforms. The podcasts come out every Wednesday. We'd love to hear from you on our socials, the Gold Diggers Podcast. Tell us about your story so we can find the gold in you.
Easy as pie, lemon, apple or cherry. Loving you is so very sweet, sweet, sweet. How can it be such a piece of cake? And your smile is the icing. Loving you is a party. Honey, you're my sugar.